we'll explain what this is at some point. Yeah. But you're I'm Nikolas Soren Goodich. This is my art. Welcome all. And Peter Frank, the amazing Peter Frank. I'm so proud to have him here. You're the man. I think you're the lead.
Well, you're the perpetrator, so. But I think, let's start with what I think is probably the most evident quality of your work to people, and that is its motivic factor. And the motif is the human visage, treated to some sort of doubling or quadrupling or mirroring
Mm-hmm.
And what it does is balance essentially an abstract and an abstracted process with an anything but an abstract image. I think the human face is probably the image that most people expect art to rely on. And so a lot of art does rely on it. And I have a thing about big heads.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there are too many of them in art. But every time I see big heads treated a different way, it's a relief, among other things. But it's also obviously quite meaningful on a broad basis, because it's one motif that pretty much anyone looking at this work, any human being looking at this work, can recognize what it is and how they relate to it, and vice versa. But I get a feeling that your motives for relying on these motifs, I never thought I'd get to use those two words in a sentence. Your motives for using these motifs go beyond merely the declaration, the emphasis on the human.
Mm-hmm.
This is something more. This is something meta-human.
Well, we were talking before about how they're signs, they're symbols. So I have this idea that elements in a painting, all elements in all paintings are symbols or signs in a linguistic sense. So that you can look at it and say that's a dog, and you use the word dog, you see the image of the dog, that kind of simplistic way of thinking. But that in my work you have this profile portrait. The profile portrait is one simple sign that we associate with ourselves, with whether it's looking at other people and with one another. I chose it over the frontal face for similar reasons to what you were just talking about, and that is that the frontal face is used in art almost exclusively. People in art are always looking out at the viewer. So to subvert that expectation, and also because I happened to wake up one night and I had this dream that had these particular kind of profile portraits in them, I decided I was going to use only this particular symbol, this particular sign of the profile portrait. Also, it turns out that my process is printmaking. I pour paint and then I print from one surface to the other. And that doubling effect, mirroring effect, or Rorschach almost effect, that originates because of the printmaking process. But by having the symbol of the person looking away from the other person, looking away from itself, or looking away from the other image, you end up with this very graphic form that looks, yes, you see the face right away, but it also has this other, it's like there's a Janus, which is like this Roman god kind of reference, but there's also just this sense of an abstract form. I can't help but say that because I'm looking at this particular piece here, that has such an abstracted sense to it. The only reason you, I think, would think of that as being two portraits is because you see it in the context of all the other work. But that level of abstraction, I think, shows up even in the works that where you feel like it's very figurative.
Right, well, but in fact, it's not so much figurative itself as pointing at figuration.
Right.
Pointing at the figure.
Right.
Not only, and by presenting the head in profile,
Mm-hmm.
it's a stronger intimation of the rest of the body.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because already when we see a head in profile, we think in terms of turning,
Mm-hmm.
and you're doubling
Mm-hmm.
the heads. Goes halfway to literalizing that spinning.
Well, and there's a
of the head.
sculptural element.
Yeah.
In the sense that there's these layers and layers of glass. So the artwork has this really visceral sense of space. It's not just the illusion of space, it's the reality of space. So then there's this strangely sculptural form of these two heads, which someone recently, something that I thought but had never really said out loud was, the Olmec heads, where they look like they're bigger than a normal head. There's something about that mass, that sense of mass in these this form, and then also the way that it's like almost like a womb. It's like a planet, or like a I don't know how to say it exactly. Some things are just purely intuitive, but like a complete space. And then they're also existing in this complete space.
They determine the space, ultimately.
I think on the opposite end, when the artwork is finished, but when I'm making it, it's the figure ground, it's the negative space and the positive space working. They work together, because the way I work is very intuitive. Like, I'll do an area, and I look at it for a long time, and because of the layers of glass, I can place them in lots of different orientations. So it's not planned, is what I mean. It's very, and we were talking about this before, it's very much discovered rather than planned.
Right. Right. The elements are planned, and you plan to set them in motion, but you don't plan quite how to set them in motion before you do so, and you certainly don't plan. You can't anticipate what's going to happen.
Exactly. Yeah, it's about process, and I trust in the process so much that I know that if I work this particular way with these particular rules, this particular media, this particular form, I will discover beautiful and potent, interesting elements that combine.
Right.
In different ways, so that there's different things happening in each artwork.
So again, you're not expressing, you're exploring.
Yeah, which I think is it's, as I've been an artist my whole life, and art is something that you can be very intentional about. I think maybe even overly intentional about, where you can say, I'm going to do this, this, and this, and yes, you can. That can, for some people, that may result in what fulfills their artistic creativity. But for me, I need to find what I usually have described as like a third place, like a space where the materials and my intention result in something totally unique, something that I wasn't anticipating. Partly because then I'm fed by the work. And I mean, not just when I'm making it, but afterwards. So, like, I put up the show, and then I've been here every weekend viewing the work, and it still feeds me with different ideas and different unique elements that I'm discovering in it. And that's important to me, because art, I think art needs to have as much of a life, an interior life to it, for people to live with it, and really have it be a part of their life.
Interesting that so much of the interior life you discover, you the artist discover, by bringing it out to the exterior. by
Mhm.
seeing it on exhibit, not simply hanging in someone's home,
Mhm.
but presented in an exhibit context. Well, I don't know if that's true for every artist these days, but I can't imagine it's not true for most. So, and it's also important to emphasize the fact that the images, the artworks themselves relate to one another, not simply through their motivic continuity, but through their graphic continuity. It's not just the same idea happening from picture to picture, but the same rendition recurring. For instance, the rendition, the profiles presented here are the same profiles presented in the large work to our back, that you and I are facing. That the very complex large light box piece in the hallway there, is the same pair of profiles you find it here, but superimposed, very different coloration and a very different visual drama.
Well, but by same, I see what you mean by the image, the sense of the image. But I think and we were talking about this before too, what I discover is, so I was saying to Peter how I draw with paint. And you think with pencil or with brush, in a normal sense of making an image, that you get a very specific line, a very specific form that you intend. You know, this looks like this. It's that's your draftsmanship, or et cetera, et cetera. But because of what I do then, where I print from one surface to the other, that process creates it completely alters any intention that I have when I make the initial pouring or initial drawing. And so that I end up discovering a whole different image, a whole different character, a whole different type of, and I know using this word very loosely, but draftsmanship. So that this, just because it's here, that's a very graphic symbol. Those shapes are very precise and very almost ornate, even if it's kind of relatively simple forms. But they're made that way through the process, not because I just decided to draw that form. And so there's something to me about like the magic of letting materials reveal themselves.
And images reveal themselves too, because there's a process of revelation here. No matter how quickly we may recognize the head,
Mm-hmm.
it takes a moment, if not a while, to read the head in the dynamic you've placed it. They work, certain of these pieces anyway, work almost like flags, which is almost the last place you'd expect a head to appear. I think of all the 190-something, 204 countries in the world, I think only one has a human form, specifically a head in it. It's one of the African countries,
Okay.
the Central African countries, Gabon. Boy, I'm sorry I didn't have that ready.
Well, I love that you say flags, because what I was saying before about signs and symbols, flags are one of our most highly refined human cultural symbols that define a whole geography and a history and a culture. And in a sense, I feel like these gender fluid, race, age, class fluid images of people that are not universal in the sense, because each face has these different characteristics that you read in different ways as containing different characteristics, different aspects. They are at the same time, like, and I've said this phrase before, portraits of everyone. Like,
But they are portraits.
They are portraits, yeah, they are portraits.
And portraits not of anyone, but
Right.
but of everyone,
Yeah.
because they are not specific to a living or having lived individual.
Mhm.
They're specific to the results of your process that
Mhm.
on that work.
Mhm. There's I feel like, so like the piece at the back is about my black grandfather William and my white grandfather William. Now, it's the only pieces I've made that is a specific, it's supposed to be, well, let's say, put it the right way, that is about a specific people.
Mhm.
The only one that I've made. Of course, it's not meant to look like them, but there's a tension between, I think, in abstraction, symbolism, intention, image.
Are the forms derived from their profiles, from their specific?
They are not. They are not. They are. What happened was I just discovered, as I was making the work, that the rainbows, and that I just discovered that that's what the work was about as I was making it.
Mhm.
That. Yeah, it was sort of a little bit strange in the sense, like I said, that no other piece that I've made in this series has that in it, but
Right.
this one immediately was like, this is what this is about.
Okay, so it's your association as opposed to your derivation.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, purely an association. But the narrative became very powerful and very clear to me.
Well, that's interesting, because that makes that points out all the more the performativity of the work. Its performativity in terms of your involved in its process in fabricating them, and its performativity in terms of getting its bearing in relationship to the viewer, and ultimately establishing their hermeneutic between you, the viewer, and the work.
Yeah, how the meaning is
Right,
revealed.
considering that your special presence in the work.
Mhm.
You're present not only as the work's author, but as its
Reader.
as its principal reader.
I'm always making many works. So like in my studio right now, I have 25 or something works that I've been working on. Some of them I just started, but some have 2 or 3 years old already. And that process of reading the work is exactly kind of what I do as I'm sitting and letting the life of the work kind of be generated, but also become legible to me, become understood to me. And then the titles become a very important part of it as well. So I'm a writer and I'm a musician and a lyricist, and I sit there in the studio and I look at these works and I think, what is it about? Of course, it's about this beautiful visual relationship, but it's also that there's content that I'm finding and discovering and seeing that I'm reading is what I'm trying to get, because using that word reading. Like, I think you do read art in a way.
Yeah, well, certain art demands to be read, and certain other art demands to be read at the same time that it demands to be seen. I don't think one is superior to the other for its clarity on the one hand and its complexity on the other, but that's just the way it works out.
Well, we were talking about abstraction before,
Yes.
and about how people read into abstraction, or pareidolia,
Right.
how abstraction creates a set of ideas in and of itself, metaphors
Exactly.
for those forms.
And this work almost reverses that process, because it presents a readily read and understood central generating image, and then obscures, even dissolves the image into
Mm.
a process that is that you find yourself in the midst of, revealed to you at that point, and never fully revealed to the viewer, but strongly intimated, so that the viewer, even more than with much abstraction, is prompted to read into the work, not only by the association with the human presence, but all the things you've done to it as well.
Reminded me of it. So this piece over here, the light box in the back, is called Sisyphus. I mean, that's the simple title. It's a longer title, but it's about Sisyphus. And so Sisyphus, takes this rock and he pushes it up the mountain and gets to the top of the mountain, and for a nanosecond believes that his life's journey is over. But of course, the rock rolls back down the mountain. He's got to go back and push it up the mountain again, which is this perfect metaphor for our life's struggle to achieve anything in our lives, right? Everything from the smallest thing in life to big things in life. But I use it, or saw it, the reason why the painting became about Sisyphus is I saw it as this metaphor for the creation of art, which on one hand, some people think is, almost meaningless, but then of course has this incredible complex depths of meaning and potentially really value for us as a species. Art's obviously one of the most ancient things that we've done, right? We've got these cave drawings that are 100,000 years old, 50,000 years old. We know that art is at a core, creativity is at the core of our being. And yet there's this intense struggle to achieve and to make that achievement valuable. And it seems like things you were just saying,
especially given the fact that for over 200 years at least, art has not relied on its depictive qualities to justify itself. It's no longer, since the camera came along, painting is not the indexical. It does not serve an indexical purpose. But still, through pareidolia or not, it has that it holds on to its outmoded indexical role. These, once we see these faces, we want to know anything we can about them. We
build narratives automatically.
Exactly. And if there's a special narrative that some people can be privy to, like everybody here knowing that the work on the back wall behind us, or behind you and facing us, is well, I guess post facto consideration of the two grandfathers William. That's special.
Well, if the narratives get revealed,
it's not necessary, but it's special.
I hope it's special, because I hope that the narratives that I perceive in the work communicate. I hope that the subtle elements that create those narratives, I hope that bigger narrative somehow connects to people. And I don't expect it to be the same, certainly for everyone. There's no way that's going to happen. But I am happily surprised when I'm communicating with someone and they're like, oh yeah, I see this, and it has a resonance with what it is that I see in the work.
And that, of course, is one of the reasons why seeing the work in an exhibition, as opposed to fabricating it individually or hanging it individually, is unique.
Sure, the whole narrative.
A unique context for understanding work.
Yes, it is.
I mean, it is just generally for any artist, but for work like this in particular.
You wanted to ask me about mirrors. I remember you were saying ahead of time.
Yeah, the process of mirroring, which obviously is the structural substrate here. All these works are based on the doubling of a head. whether the two heads whether the two heads are identical, whether they're or not, whether they're facing each other or not. Two heads are obviously better than one. And that doubled motif is, I think, the first, whether or not it's the chief subject present, it's certainly the chief thing, first thing we see, and take our cues from trying to understand. There are also in art certain models that, if you had, whether or not you followed them, we're aware of them. Like I was talking about Bruce Nauman's series of neon pieces before, where the facing heads blink on and off. They're in forms of combat, in forms of dialogue, intimations of all sorts of dramatic interaction between the two facing figures, who are invariably identical, even more so than yours are. You told me that you were essentially unaware of the Nauman works, but once we looked them up, you said, well, it certainly makes sense in the context of his work and yours. But you also mentioned several European, somewhat older post-war artists like Pierre Alashinsky and Horst Dantes, artists who were well known in American art circles in the 60s and 70s, and now are people that that people visiting American museums stumble upon. If they go to Europe and go to European museums, they'll see a lot more of them, obviously, and that's to be expected. But it's kind of a shame that these artists of unusual interest and inventiveness are not lost to us, but forgotten by us. And there's just your work, whether consciously or not, revives a certain engagement in the kind of aesthetic that they propounded.
Well, when I was when I was in my teens, I saw a lot of European neo-expressionism. This just was the 80s, right? So I saw a lot of Sigmar Polka, and I saw a lot of Anselm Kiefer and Horst Dantes and other neo-expressionists. Is it Himmendorf? Himmendorf. And so
Himmendorf and Mittendorf.
Okay, I did not know they were both. Yeah. But those artists, their intense colors, there's a certain passion, a certain kind of human angst.
An involvement with the process of making the work.
Definitely about process.
You sure feel that in Kiefer.
Well, yeah, absolutely.
And Baselitz.
At Baselitz, absolutely. So I know that they influenced me. It took me a long time to break free from being attached to the darker sides of those artists. Just personally, that was something that I was very connected to because I just thought the world was in a very dark place, and then my life was in a very dark place. But in the last 4 or 5 years, I've been able to transcend that, and I made some very clear decisions to really go out to just use as bright, intense, saturated colors as possible, and to push the textures and the patterns to find other aspects of those influences to how I manifested the work. But to what I was going to say is about mirroring. So I feel like the works are like an essay about mirroring. like, so that you've got these, what I call these recursive levels of meaning that are in terms of the formal content of the work, the layering of the glass, the mirroring of the images in the literal sense of, but then the narratives of, so you've got someone looking into a mirror, you've got us looking at the art, you've got us looking at the portrait. That's a form of mirroring.
And if, yeah, in a sense, we're looking at the art, waiting for it to mirror us.
It feeds us narratives about our own life. That's one level of mirroring as well.
Yeah, or provokes them or awakens them. The pareidolia you mentioned. About from what Frank Stella's famous for saying, what you see is what you see, indicating an entirely neutral structure presented as an entire image, as a complete image. But what you see is what you see. Why are they called pinstripes? Because that's what people saw when they were first exhibited. These patterns, these structures, these intimations, all have formal echoes that we can't help but recognize. That, you know, that once we perceive them, we can't unperceive them. And you know, once we hear Frank Stella's early work called Pinstripes, we can't not see pinstripes. So you always hope to catch the work before it gets labeled.
Well, what are we going to label my work then?
You brought up Janus before.
Yes.
The Roman god who gave his name to January. Because January looks backwards to the previous year and forward to the year it's in.
Yes.
The two-headed god.
Yes.
However, I mean, the Janus series would be the perfect thing to call this body of work. But then you're
subverted.
You're pre-directing the viewer to read it that way. Although that may be the closest to neutral identification you can give the body of work. Anything else might be more provocative, especially because so few people now know who Janus was.
Right. Well, I've been calling them double inverted portraits.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
But the inversion is, inversion usually seems to imply sort of upside down.
Right.
I don't know if I'm right about that, but this inversion is horizontal. So you've got the doubling, you've got the portraiture, you've got the inversion.
Well, which one is flipped and which one is flopped?
That's a very good question. Which direction is which?
Can anybody answer that?
I think it's subjective.
Which is flipping and which is flopping?
Is it up or down or left or right?
Exactly. I mean, in music, it's retrograde, inversion, and retrograde inversion.
Okay. I thought that was the moon. No, wait, that's something else.
That's Mercury.
Mercury, yes, of course. Mercury is such a bad rap, you know.
It's coming.
Is it coming now?
December.
Okay.
It's
going retrograde.
It's going
Yes.
as if things couldn't get worse.
Oh, no.
But that's the whole point. Mercury isn't about things getting worse. It's just about
It's perception. It's not really going backwards.
maybe it is. Mercury is about adjusting to a different pace, a different MO. You know, going into the studio and saying, I'm putting aside the oils, I'm dealing with watercolors for the next 3 weeks.
Well, so
And that's the sculptor.
I make these works on plexiglass that are on canvas, right? But then I also make some works that are plexiglass in light boxes, sort of.
Yeah.
Not really light boxes, they're edge lit, or that's a light panel. But then these works are edge lit, but they're glass. So this is kiln fired glass and plexiglass. So there's all these, what I was just saying is to connect what you're just, there's, when I go into the studio, I'm like, which one of these 4 or 5 permutations of my glass and luminosity forms am I going to engage in? And you know, I've told you before that my real dream is this, which you guys are seeing this video. So this is my real dream. So the real purpose behind why I make all my work is because someday I want to make this, which is called the Luminous Community Center. So this is a building made out of my paintings. So imagine these 20 feet tall by 20 feet wide walls of a building. And to connect to just what you're saying, so every time I'm in the studio, I'm like, what formal experiment do I do that helps me get towards making this complex idea? Or, you know, so these are like, sort of, the process is like always an experiment.
Oh, this is it. It's interesting. So your overall
Yes. Yes, there
project
is.
as an artist.
Yes, there is. And that is to make spaces that people could be in where they're immersed in the light that comes through the work, the colors, you know, so there's a rainbow there. That's like a great representation of how light is color and color is what we are immersed in.
Have you already designed the elements of the structure?
Yes, yes. Well, I'm working with a team of amazing public art fabricators and people, and architects to design the actual building itself. Yeah, that's a whole other complex subject, but just so that people understand what that is.
But it's a parallel. I mean,
Yeah.
Because do they work intuitively with their aspects the way you do with yours?
No. In some ways, because there's going to be some interesting formal experimentation in terms of how the building is built. Sure. Yeah.
Participating, listening. Thank you, Nikolas, for doing and being.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.